and welcome back to the coffee table, where we spill all the tea, or should I say coffee, on all of our favorite books. I'm your host, Daniela Gonzalez. On this episode and the next 4, I'll be talking about the first Hunger Games books and seeing if it's worth a read. Before we get started though, let's do a small recap of everything you should know before reading this book. This book was written by Susan Collins, a New York Times bestselling author. Her imagination takes us to post-apocalyptic North America, where the nation of Panem lies. Panem is a brilliant capital with 12 districts surrounding it. The capital is a cruel place that keeps all 12 districts in order no matter what the cost is. In this case, the cost is to send 2 tributes from each district to enter an arena to fight to the death on live television. As you can probably tell, Panem doesn't seem to be the nicest place to live. It seems like a cruel place in which any second you could be chosen to fight in the Hunger Games, and maybe never return. A great representation of this would be the famous words of Katniss Everdeen. "Once I'm on my feet, I realize escape might not be so simple." Panic begins to set in. I can't stay here. Fight is essential, but I can't let my fear show. Winning means fame and fortune. Losing means certain death. The Hunger Games have begun. Chapter 1 is like any basic chapter 1. It introduces our protagonist, who is Katniss Everdeen, and also our antagonist, which would be Panem, or the capital. In chapter 1, we also get introduced to a couple of important characters, and we get introduced to Katniss, our main character, Primrose. We also get introduced to Katniss and Prim's mother. We get introduced to Gale, who is Katniss's best friend and her hunting partner. And then we get introduced to Effie Trinket and Haymatch. So in chapter 1, we're introduced to Katniss, and we kind of get a glimpse of who she is as a person, and I guess kind of what she does. We also we get introduced to the Hunger Games and kind of what the Hunger Games are, which essentially the Hunger Games are like this kind of battle royale where two tributes from each district, one male, one female, have to fight each other to the death until there's one winner who wins this fame and many riches for their district. So we get introduced to that. And then back to Katniss. We get introduced to her life, all that stuff. And we get to see what she does on a daily. So basically what she does is she goes out beyond the borders. She goes out to hunt with her hunting partner. After that, she goes into the black market to sell so she can provide for her family. And then she brings home food. If you're wondering why she does all this and why her father might not, why her mother might not, it's because her father tragically passed away in a mining accident along with Gale's father. So when Katniss was around 12-ish, there was like this explosion that went off in the coal mines that they trapped Katniss's father and I guess buried him to death, or buried him alive. So ever since then, she had to kind of fend for herself, her mother, and her sister, since after her father died, her mother fell into this deep depression that broke her to the point where she could barely even get out of bed sometimes. So Katniss, after that, she became very kind of, in a sense, she became kind of heartless, but heartless where she had to do it to protect her family so her family wouldn't starve to death. So during the story where we find her, she's just doing her daily routine, selling, bartering, and she goes home and she has to actually prepare for the Hunger Games, since the drawing of names for the Hunger Games is that day. So she prepares, she gets herself ready, all dolled up, and her family, her mother, her sister, and her, they all head to the square, which is this area where I guess the District 12, they always have important things there. So like they have festivals, carnivals, all that stuff. So they head to the square, and at the square, a couple things happen before the name drawing. So the mayor comes out. The anthem of Panem happens, or like plays. Mayor comes out. He says a couple of words. He tells the story of Panem, which we don't actually get in book 1, but I'm sure we'll get in later books. And then comes out Ify Trinket and Haymatch, which Haymatch was a previous District 12 winner for the Hunger Games, which hasn't happened in like 30 years. And Haymatch is also a mentor, and Ify Trinket is also a mentor, and she's the one who pulls out names for the Hunger Games. So Ify starts with the girls' little name pulling or whatever, and to the biggest shock of the 21st century, Primrose, Katniss's younger sister's name, is pulled. Now Prim has to participate in the Hunger Games, and this is where the book really starts. So as you can kind of imagine, Katniss, she isn't the happiest person at this moment. But before we actually get to see what her actions are after this, we get to see a flashback. So this flashback was when Katniss was at her lowest, when her father had just died. Like, when she realized her father was dead, she couldn't think, she couldn't speak. All the air was, like, knocked out of her, she couldn't breathe. And this is exactly how she felt when her sister was picked for the Hunger Games. She couldn't think, breathe, speak. And so all the kids in the scene knew Katniss was Prim's older sister. So they made a path for her so she could pass. And Katniss yells her iconic line, "I volunteer as tribute." This was a surprise to everyone since District 12 hadn't seen a tribute in decades, since for District 12, the Hunger Games, no one really wants to participate. It's an instant death. So she yells her famous line, "I volunteer as tribute." It was a surprise, and so once Katniss volunteers, Ify is extremely happy since there hasn't been a tribute in decades. So, but she doesn't know proper protocol, so she's kind of confused on what to do, but the mayor, with this pained expression on his face, tells her to continue with the reaping. The book tells us the mayor didn't really know Katniss that well. All he really knew about her was she was a girl who would sell strawberries to his family. She was a girl who would talk to his daughter occasionally at school. She was a girl who was awarded the Medal of Valor after her father was vaporized. So, Prim was screaming hysterically and trying to hold on to Katniss for dear life, but peacekeepers and Gale had to pull her away. Ify congratulates Katniss, and with much certainty in her voice, she says, "I bet my buttons that was your sister. Don't want her to steal the glory, do you?" Come on, everybody, let's give a big round of applause to our newest tribute. So, to no one's surprise, no one actually claps, but in this moment, Katniss turns into somewhat of a precious item. Everyone touches their 3 middle fingers on their left hand to their lips, and then they raise it. The book tells us that this was a gesture that was rarely used, but when it was used to say thank you, to express admiration, and to say goodbye to someone you love. So it was this very beautiful moment, and Katniss was about to cry. But this moment was ruined when Haymitch stumbles in very, very drunk. He decided to congratulate Katniss, but instead he makes a fool of himself, making this whole ruckus and this mess at the reaping. So before this can go on any farther, Ify picks a boy's name, and it belongs to a boy named Peter Malark. Katniss actually recognizes the name from when her father had just passed away. So the backstory to her recognition of the name was when her father passed away, and it was a very hard time for Katniss. The numbness of his death had just passed, and the pain was really beginning to set in. District 12 had given her family a check for compensation, in which District 12 had expected her mother to find a job, but she didn't. She was too hurt, she was too pained by his death that she would just sit around doing nothing all day. And Katniss was absolutely terrified. It was a very scary moment for her because she knew that her father didn't just leave, but so did her mother. Like, her mother wasn't there anymore. She was kind of like a lifeless body at this point. So Katniss was very scared since she knew that her family was barely surviving. Like, they were running out of money quickly, and they needed to find food, or else they would starve. So or else her family would starve. So this day Katniss was trying to head into town to trade, but no one would offer, and it was raining. So the rain had soaked through her father's hunting jacket, leaving her freezing cold. And Katniss wouldn't dare go home because she knew she would have to face her mother with her dead eyes and her starving sister. I'm actually going to skip a little bit since this is getting a little bit lengthy, but to summarize it up, she stumbles in front of the bakery, and Peeta, he's the baker's son. So he sees her starving to death, and he decides to purposely burn a piece of bread, which he faces abuse from his mother, but he gives it to Katniss so she can take it home to her family so they would be able to see another day. Chapter 3 may not sound very interesting, but there's a lot of stuff happening that actually contributes to the later plot. So there's no more yelling or hysterical crying. It feels like everything is numb, but there's still pain. Once the final anthem at the end of the reaping ends, Peeta and Katniss are taken into custody and into the Justice Building, into separate rooms where their families are able to see them and say their final goodbyes. Katniss' sister and mother came in first. It was a very heartfelt and bittersweet moment when they reunite once again. Prim immediately jumped on her older sister and held her in a very tight embrace. Her mother sits next to them while they share an embrace that might be their last. Katniss instructs them on everything that they should do now that she wouldn't be there to help them. Prim would continue to sell her goat cheese, her mother would help with her apothecary business. Gale would gather herbs that Prim didn't grow in her garden. He would also bring home fresh meat. They should think about what to trade and many more instructions. Katniss then turned to her mother and told her that she couldn't leave again, like how she left when their father died. She had to help out and she had to be there for Prim. Katniss made her promise that she would fight through it. Prim then starts giving Katniss instructions like how she should be brave and take care of herself. And that's all she cares about, is that her sister comes home. Their time was up, so when they hugged again and then her family left. The next person to come in was Peeta Mellark's father, the baker. They weren't very familiarized with each other, but he was extremely fond of Primrose and would always trade her goat cheese for a hearty amount of bread. He sits next to Katniss and hands her a white bag full of homemade cookies. They sit in silence for some time. Katniss tries to make small talk, but it makes the scene a lot more awkward. Once it's finally time for the baker to leave, he tells Katniss that he'll keep an eye on Prim and make sure she eats. The next person, which Katniss again didn't expect to be there, was Mage, the mayor's daughter. I didn't mention this earlier, but when the book was talking about Katniss's daily routine, one part of it was getting wild strawberries and selling them to the mayor's daughter, and the mayor's daughter was actually very good acquaintances with Katniss since they went to school together, and sometimes they would pair up for projects or pair up for gym class. So Katniss didn't really expect Mage to be there, but she was. So Mage she tells Katniss that they let tributes wear something to remind them of home. So she gives her a pin with a mockingjay on it. And basically what mockingjays are, they're these hybrid animals. In the book, they're called mutts. And so during the rebellion, the rebellion of District 13, the Capitol bred a series of genetically altered animals as weapons. The commonly used term was mutts for short. So one of them was called a jabberjay that had the ability to memorize and repeat whole human conversations. They were hummingbirds that were exclusively male, that were released into the regions where the capital's enemies were known to be in hiding, like District 13, which no longer exists. So after the birds gathered information, they would fly back to like the centers from where they were released, and they would tell the capital what had gone on. And so it took people a while to realize what was going on in the districts and how these private conversations, they were being monitored by the district, or not by the district, by the capital. So the centers were eventually shut down and the birds were abandoned to die off in the wild. The funny part is they didn't actually die off. Instead, the jabberjays, they mated with mockingbirds, creating a whole new species that could replicate both bird whistles and human melodies, and they were called mockingjays. Back to the story. Katniss promises Mage that she'll wear the pin in the arena, so finally Mage gives her a kiss on the cheek and leaves. And the final person to visit Katniss is Gale. He opens his arms for a hug, and she feels a sense of comfort from his embrace. It felt like familiar to her. His heartbeat, his signature scent, the way he moved, it brought Katniss a sense of peace. So after their embrace, he tells her what to do to survive in the Hunger Games and to possibly win. He tells her to grab a knife, get a bow. If you can't get a bow, make one. And he just gives her words of encouragement and reassurance that like she can do it, she's smart, she can outwit them. So he gives her survival tips, and after the survival tips, their time was pretty much up. So the peacekeepers are like trying to pull him back, and Katniss was yelling at him like, "Oh yeah, make sure my family stays alive. Take care of them." He yells back, "He will," in response, and that he wants her to remember he was pulled out before he could finish what he was saying. So the next thing Katniss knew, her and Peeta were on the train heading to the capital in new fancy clothes, meeting their new mentor, Haymitch. So on my thoughts for the first three chapters, they're actually really good. I like how much detail was put into them. A lot of it I didn't leave in since, this isn't supposed to be a 30-minute video. So it's a very good book so far. I really liked it, and honestly, I don't think Katniss deserved that much. Like, the amount of pain she went through. Like, first her father dies, she lives in the poorest area of the district, and then she has to fend for her entire family, and then her sister gets chosen for, like, the Hunger Games. That's pretty traumatic. So next we have favorite parts. I think my favorite part was probably when the baker was there for Katniss, and was telling her that like, "Oh yeah, I'll take care of your sister," or when Katniss was like, "I'll volunteer as tribute." I think those parts really stood out to me. And for predictions, I already know what's gonna happen in the books, but you can put your predictions down in the comments. You just listened to another episode of Coffee Table with your host, Daniela. Subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Bye!